Let's get going. We've got plenty to do. I've got more notes than yesterday and I want to plough through it quickly and give plenty of time to discuss and so on. But how about I pray and we'll jump into it. Father, we do ask, please, that you might bless our time together, and we ask that because we long to see your name honoured in your grace extending to more and more people. And we pray that you might please help us lead in such a way that we are able to be used by you to further the cause of the gospel across this land. We do pray again, please, that you might in your mercy pour out your Spirit through the ministries of the word to bring many thousands, then millions of people to bow the knee to Christ and find life in him. We plead for this, ask that you might be gracious, that you might bring a great turning, but make us what we need to be, that you might bring about that end. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, yesterday the idea was to lay the foundations, not just foundations, because the danger with thinking they were foundations is that you lay the foundations and then you do something else. My hope with you yesterday was to not just lay the foundations, but help us get some values that don't just found us, but colour everything. You know, actually are shot through all the things we do. And I want to urge you, therefore, in summary, to get the gospel vision. I want you to get the gospel vision, to shift your eyes to outputs, to not simply be thinking about just being faithful. Now, by saying that, I don't want to in many ways diminish being faithful, not at all, but it's being faithful that we might see the outcome of people discipled, to see spiritual growth happen, numeric growth happen. We ought never be embarrassed about the pursuit of numeric growth because it's souls saved. And I appreciate that there are dangers associated with this shift. There are dangers associated with the shift of thinking outputs, not just inputs. There are dangers associated with the shift into thinking about, or being aware now much more intensely, that I contribute to the problem, as we wrestled with yesterday. And a verse came to my mind after the session. It's one of those things you wish you'd thought of. Romans chapter 10 is a very clear evidence, isn't it? That how will they hear unless someone preaches? And how will someone preach unless someone sends them? And so you've got this very clear link between the gospel going out, God's intention to save the world, is dependent on us actually preaching the word, sending people to preach the word. And so we are used by God in this. My point in this is there's nowhere safe. You can't retreat into, I'm just going to be faithful, because if you retreat back into there, you will have to answer to the Lord for your failure to actually pursue things to actually see a difference made. That's not safe. It's not safe either living with a passion to see numeric growth happen, because that has its dangers as well. There's nowhere safe. That's ministry together, friends. We've just got to grow up and deal with this reality and help each other in it. Now, I noted the outputs, I noted the inputs. Outputs, let me remind you very broadly, the output that we're after is to see a disciple made. Disciple made has two dimensions to it: someone being brought to Christ, becoming a follower of Christ, someone deepened in the things of Christ. So very broadly, you've got two outputs we're seeking to achieve: conversion and maturity. Someone being made like Christ. They're the two big things. Of course, the inputs, word, prayer, in godly life, by the power of the Spirit. Now, all of this, I would suggest to you, leads to an action that is very, very un-English, if I might presume to say, and very impolite. I heard a word, indelicate. That is a lovely word, and this is perhaps indelicate. But I want to encourage you to embrace that it doesn't just matter how you play the game. It matters that you win or lose. Now, some of your sports teams have started to get hold of that, and I wish they wouldn't. But do you know what I mean? Australians have never had a problem with that. We just want to win. But in ministry, it doesn't just matter how you play the game. It matters that you win or lose, because we're dealing with lives. Life and death, heaven and hell. Now, we must be careful, but we must care about numbers, growth, change. So, measure how you are going. Run through all the ministries you're doing and ask the question, are they working? Are they, that is to say, your small group network. Now, we call them growth groups because we want to actually We want to convey a very clear understanding they're not just about being in a house. Do you know what I mean? Like, the thing that we're doing is not just house. So we don't call them house groups. We call them growth groups, because the thing we're doing is growing. Now, are they growing people? Why are you doing them if they're not? Well, you might have decided the reason we're doing them is because we want houses used. Well, all right, if you're using houses, you've achieved your output and all, fantastic. But if you're actually about growing people, are you seeing, you've got to measure. You've actually got to dig in and find out, is it working? Be ruthlessly honest. And if there's no ruthless honesty, you've got no hope. You'll live in a dream. You'll live in an idealistic, Now, none of this is without constraint. There are constraints. There's boundaries. The inputs are crucial. Word, prayer, godly living. They're the heartbeat of what we do. The engine is these things. It's not as if you can just bring about an output by any means at all. No, there are constraints. But having laid all of this, my intention with you today is to now press on into some practical skill areas. But I do this aware that it's a lower order activity, and I'm not as excited about it. Although you just hear a message this morning from Ephesians 3 about the love of Christ, and very wonderfully unpacking for us, a very helpful insight about the love of Christ being displayed in the cross, the centrality of the cross and propitiation, all of that. There is what we're about. That's our work, yeah? And that's my work. That's my heartbeat. That's what I want to spend my days doing, okay? But the reason I can care about what I'm about to talk to you about is because it enables us to do that work better. That's the only reason I think it has merit to talk about. Talking about these skills will be important. I've found them to be important because they facilitate more of us being able to proclaim the news of Christ's love to a world that so desperately needs it. That's the big thing. Now, these skills are important, and they're more important than simply downloading here's the 6 things that you should do in your church when you hit 400 if you do this, this, and this. There's all kinds of information about breaking barriers, and I can talk to you about that at some point. But I think more important than that kind of information are the skills that I bring to assessing that information. The skills that I bring to the whole work I'm involved in. Because sometimes those things won't work in different contexts and what have you. So my passion is to develop leaders who are able to bring a skilled up person to the models. We all work with models. It's not a problem. There are some kind of freak people who can just land somewhere and make it all up, but the rest of us actually use other things that other people have worked out. But you've got to bring skills to it to make sense of it. Now, there's 4 areas of skill that I want to talk to you about today. They go right to the basics, and I apologise in advance if you've got some of these already nailed, but my experience in talking to lots of pastors around the place is that we are still struggling with the basics. So some of you will be in different places, and bear with me as we go through. These are the ones that I think make a massive difference. Let me take you to the first one. I've gone backwards. Oh, now I don't know where I am. Here we go. Learning to lead yourself is the first skill. Learning to lead yourself, which is really the leadership principle that will drive everything that we talk about today. Now, the first thing is, as you learn to lead yourself, is to get the gospel. I'm aware that in all that I've talked about so far, I'm beginning now to put things on you that you must do, that you may not have already been doing a lot of. I'm going to be putting a whole bunch of stuff on you that you must do. Getting the gospel is critical for all your work. Now that takes time. To dig deep into the Word, to get the gospel, to understand the theological shape and frame of the Bible, that takes to read well and widely, that takes time. Now, that won't happen. Getting the gospel deeper won't happen unless you learn to lead yourself. Unless you learn to work out your life, your week, your calendar, your timetable. I don't probably need to tell you this, but the jobs that we do are incredibly pressured. We've done some research now, our friends have done some research all the way through Sydney Anglican ministers, and here is the typical diary, here is the vibe of the diary of one particular man in our diocese. And you can see it's packed with all kinds of things that he's committed to and involved in. And further to this, the research is showing across Sydney Anglican ministers that burnout is borderline through to being a problem for 3/4 of ministers, over 3/4 of ministers. Only, I think it's at 21%, I can't read that, is it 21% that don't have an issue with burnout? Now, I don't doubt that that's common amongst you here as well. You are already feeling squeezed. The jobs we're in are pressured. The hours that you put in are massive. You've got all kinds of diary problems and so on. And here I am telling you to do one more thing to add in, you see. And in fact, in a few minutes, I'll give you about 20 more things to add in. So I'm conscious that as we do this, it raises the issue for us to be effective ministers and pastors. It's critical that we learn to lead ourselves, to manage our lives and our times. It's so basic. And here's the very basic thing. You need to learn to be proactive. I mean, it's so fundamentally basic, but you need to learn to be proactive. Now, how do you be proactive? Well, the key to being proactive and not reactive, the key to being proactive is knowing what you're seeking to achieve with your life. What's the output I want with my life? Where is it what I want to achieve? See, we're thinking outputs again. If you've never thought into that, what is it that my life wants to have made a difference in, then you will be reactive. You'll be at the mercy of everything that comes your way. Now, from watching lots of us, and I haven't been here, this is not a comment about you at all because I've kept my eyes shut and not watched, but in Australia, in watching lots of us there and other contexts I work, what I've noticed is that the things that we want to achieve in ministry is that no one hates us. That's the big output we're after. We're running keep everyone happy ministries. And we feel like our great task is to make sure that no one gets hurt and no one's unhappy. That's the nature of it. Now, I'll give you the evidence that you move from being a reactive minister to being a proactive minister. The evidence that you are a proactive minister is that you say no. Actually, that's not quite right. We're always saying no. It's just that it's not obvious that we're doing that to ourselves. Let me give you a quick rave about yes, no. When you say yes to something, it always implies a no to something else. And if you've not worked that out yet, you are at the mercy of all kinds. When you say yes, you are always saying no. I'll give you an example. The other day, actually a couple of months ago now, I was at my desk. I got an email that one of the men in church was in hospital. He'd been there to get a leukemia, who was having various transplants and so on, but it had turned sour and they didn't expect him to live out the day. He was probably going to die. And the hospital was in Sydney. That's a 2-hour trip for me to get there. And the request came through that would Andrew come and visit the family. They're distressed and deeply concerned and so on. Now, I said yes, I would be there. I rarely go to hospital and I rarely do visits. But I said yes. I drove down, sat for 2 hours with the man and his family until he died. And then they pulled all the machines and cleaned up, and I stayed with the family until we went back in and prayed with them and so on. And they really appreciated it. They were really very helped by it. But what it meant was that I'd said no to the thing I'd planned to do in that block of time. Now, I knew what it was I was saying no to because I'd planned my diary to know what I was saying no to, do you see? Now, was that the right thing to do? Was that really the loving decision? Well, yeah, I mean, there's a group of people in need and deep need, and I can help them with the need. And they're really appreciative and they know how much I love them now because I was there. Come and have a look at Mark chapter 1. The context is, verse 29, there's a healing that takes place. Verse 32, after That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed came. The whole town gathers at the door. Jesus healed many who had various diseases, drove out many demons. He wouldn't let the demons speak. Very early in the morning, while it's still dark, Jesus gets up, leaves the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. When they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby village, so I can preach there also. That is why I've come." Now I'm going to tease out a couple of things here that are very simple, but do you know what he just did then? He said no. He said no to a very real and deep human need of someone who was deeply sick, demon-possessed, hurting. He heard their need, they were right there. He said no. Was that a good thing? Let me think with you about what makes something good for a moment. Now, this is just Ethics 101. Again, I apologise if you've heard all this stuff, but how do you work out whether an action is a good action, a loving action? Well, there's, 3, possibly 4 ways of understanding. You've got the deontological view, you've got the teleological view, you've got the consequential view, and you've got the view of character. Is this ringing bells for people back into theological college? So, deontological. It's just in itself right. God says it's right, it's right. The teleological view. There's, in its very nature of the thing I'm involved in, it has a direction and purpose towards something, which means to engage in that direction and purpose is a right thing. The consequential view, the utilitarian kind of view, it's an action I do brings about great good. Makes it good by the consequences. You see the difference so far? Teleological isn't interested in the consequences. It just is either right or wrong, whatever the consequences. Consequential, it's right on the basis of the consequences. Character comes into it, and I'll come to that in a second. Now look, how do you measure therefore whether something's good? Well, you've got to think harder about this. Was it good to say no to my sermon preparation to go and visit someone in hospital for 4.5, 5 hours? Now, if you operate with, I don't want anyone to be unhappy, then of course it was a good thing. Because if I didn't do it, they'd be dirty with me, the rest of the congregation would hear about it and they'd be unhappy with me. But what they won't have noticed is that the sermon on the weekend wasn't as incisive or sharp. I mean, I can still pull off a sermon when I'm cleaning my teeth in the morning and get to church. You know, I mean, I can make something up. But it won't have the bite, it won't be as sharp, it won't make... Now, there's 1,500 people impacted by a sermon. So, the Bible doesn't say that I should visit him. You've got Jesus who actually didn't visit him. So I've got good grounds from the Scriptures to actually conclude that it's not, you know. But the consequences are, if I don't visit, I've got consequences. If I... if I do visit, I've got. If I don't visit, there's consequence. If I visit, there's consequence. I've got to work all that out, and that's part of developing a character where I have the kind of character that has a soft heart, hard head, thinks through clearly. You see Jesus. Why does he say no? Because he's saying yes to something else. What was he saying yes to? Preaching the gospel elsewhere. Because that's why I've come. What he had was a bigger yes that he was pursuing, which enabled him to have clarity about what to say no to. Jesus was operating exactly like this. He could have fixed up the desperate human need right there and then. He could have said yes to it, but by saying no to it, he knew that he was in a place to actually fix it up eternally. And that was the bigger thing to fix. And he had that clearly, others didn't. No one around him had it. And he had to live with that no one understood him. No one understood what was happening. He operated with priorities. You've only got so many hours in your week. That's a reality. How you use those hours is a fixed resource. How you use those hours will contribute to the outcome of the gospel in your area. Own it. Stop trying to live with sentimentality that it'll all work out. Own the fact that you are part and contributing to what happens in your area with your fixed number of hours. Take charge of those hours. Don't be at the mercy of the urgent. Don't be at the mercy of the person who feels the most. How do you take charge? Well, you fill up your diary before others fill it up. That's the first step. So that when things do come to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you always say no, but it means that when you do say yes, you know exactly what you're saying no to. That for mine's the key. See, Jesus often did turn aside out of compassion and healed. Now, there's the character. So I worry about a man who never turns aside, you see. Who was so strategically focused that he just says no to anything that actually... No, I worry about someone like that because the Lord Jesus turned aside out of compassion. But he kept saying yes to the bigger thing and getting there. So these are complex decisions. But you're not in a position to deal with them properly if you haven't actually started to work out what I am trying to achieve. What is the big yes I'm about here? And manage my diary to actually reflect that so that when I do say yes, I know what I'm saying no to. Take charge. And let me give you some thoughts about how to take charge. Now, this is basic stuff, and it comes from a book by Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read it because I thought I'd like to be effective, and by having it on my shelf, it makes me feel effective. But what you've got here is, let's see if I can do this. What you've got here is you've got urgent, non-urgent, important, not important. Everything in life fits into one of those boxes. So the top left box, urgent, important things, crises, pressing problems, deadline-driven projects, non-urgent, important things. I'm going to come to that in a second. The unimportant, urgent, the telephone call, some mail, some emails, some meetings. Not urgent, unimportant, TV, trivia, soccer. It's always unimportant, soccer. Just make sure you keep that clear. Rugby league and rugby union, now that's different. But what you've got there is a helpful insight by Covey. And what you need to do is actually realise everything in life fits into one of those boxes. But you won't... Now, what are the ones that fits into the important, non-urgent stuff? Here's the thing. Here's the Covey insight that I found so helpful years ago. The stuff in the important, non-urgent stuff is the stuff that will make the difference in 5, 10 years' time in your ministry. That's the key stuff that will change your ministries around. But because it's not urgent, you won't get to it unless you're proactive. Now, I'm going to come to that in a second. Take charge. Now, some of you are in such a mess with your diaries. The first thing you've got to do is take charge enough to carve out 2 hours to work out your diary. Do you know what I'm saying? You've actually got to take charge enough to carve out 2 hours to work out how I can actually find 2 days to get away to think about what I'm doing and what matters most. Now, so if you come and say to me, look, Andrew, that's well and good for you. You've got all these people and you go, no, I just can't get the time to do that. I say, stop blaming other people. You're the problem. And you're the problem because you've not made the time to find out how to make the time. Everyone can do it. You've just got to take responsibility. I'm going to keep coming back to that issue, the issue of responsibility. You end up being in a situation where you're like a courier, a mail courier, who, he's running his own business with a whole bunch of mail that he's got to deliver. That's how he makes his living, getting the things there on time. But his car is only firing on 3 cylinders, so he can only make, what's your speed limit, 35 mile an hour or something? I don't know what it is, but he can only get 15 miles an hour. And so he can going slower and slower and slower with all the mail that he's got to deliver, which means he's got even less time. He's worried about the car, and if it would only go faster, it'd be better, but he hasn't got time to put it in the mechanic because he's got more and more jobs to do. Where he's got to do is he's got to actually bite the bullet and say, I'm going to say no to actually making money, to get the car into the mechanic, to fix it up, that I can actually get it going faster for the long-term benefit of. Now that takes someone with a bit of courage. Now I work on this kind of stuff with people all the time, and so in our church, one of our guys is a focused leader, and if we have time, I'll actually get to talk a little bit about how we structure church and how we think about it, but he's a focused leader in one of our congregations. He's a fantastic guy. He's been struggling with an overload of work, and so I've been working with him to actually get his life in order to actually make him more effective. And so I've got him to go through this project, work out what we're trying to achieve, what is the thing we've done all of that, and then we've filled it up into his box, what is urgent, what's not urgent, and then he's actually built it into his diary. He's got an A and B week diary, and what I want you to notice is that what he's done is, you'll see he's built, let me just give you an example here, that little box there, I think, is profile. Does it say profile? Yeah. What we've realised is that the particular focus work that he's on will only grow if it gets greater profile. But he can't get to it because there's so many urgent demands. So when he did his analysis, we've worked out that's a crucial area. He's worked out how much time he needs to give to it each week, and he's built it into his diary that he's going to stop whatever he's doing, sit down and work on that particular problem. And what it means is he can actually give himself time to go, what is the problem? You know, what am I trying to achieve with profile? What are the ways I can actually make it work? What steps would I need to take? And he's got that blocked into his diary so he can actually now move forward on the problem. You got it? Now he's done that with all of his work. He's put in time with his wife. I think he gets an hour and a half on a Sunday. That's the nature of our church life. He can't remember his anniversaries either. But there's the kind of thing you've got to start to work. You've got to learn to lead yourself. Now, this is important for everyone, but it's critical for you. And I'm pointing the finger. It's critical for you because you are the most important human resource the church has. That's why I'm going at you, and we'll keep going at you. To get you going, to get you sorted out, is critical for the church of God. I mean, God himself says, 1 Timothy chapter 4, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. What you do will have an impact. You see, we're back there again, outputs. You contribute to the output. It's absolutely critical that you take responsibility and get some tools to work this out because it'll run through all that we're going to be doing next. Get hold of Kobe's book. It's an old book, a book well worth reading though. And identify whether there are things within you that are stopping you work this out. It's interesting, I've noticed over the years that pastors actually have a particular view of pastoral ministry that means they're reluctant to do this kind of thing because it feels wrong. They have a particular view of the pastoral ministry which is, I am there to meet the needs of the people. And so, no, I'm not going to say no when someone knocks, when someone rings, when an email comes. Well, you need to actually think through, is that biblical? Mark chapter 1. Is that how the great shepherd operated? You might actually have that inner issue that you need to wrestle through. Certainly, all of us are in churches that think we should be reactive and not proactive. They want us to be there for them when they have the need. If we're going to reach the world, if we're going to reach Britain, the United Kingdom, we need each of you to step up and stop being at the mercy of every bleating sheep. Actually know when to stop listening. Be proactive. Use your time well, which is the platform for the next couple of skills I want to take you through. Let's get to the next one. The second one is lost in some fashion. Yeah, maybe that should just have a 2 on it. Let's call this 2. Learn to lead yourself and get your PA sorted out as well. But learn to do the core ministries of ministry. Let's wrestle with this one. So learn to lead yourself. Learn to actually get control of your life, diary, be proactive, work out where you're going. Now learn to actually do the core ministries. Basically, this is about learning to lead other people such that you make the difference God wants you to make in their life. Now, what's the difference God wants to make in a person's life? He wants them to grow and change. Now, notice I've gone to outputs again. We need to be those people that actually learn to lead others so that they grow spiritually. There's 2 dimensions I'm going to take you through. But the first thing is, we need to learn that there are skills that will help us know how to help someone under God, by His grace, sovereignly grow to be a fully mature follower of Christ. Now, yes, you don't control the outcome. You do have an influence, though. Back to the initial conversation yesterday. Your skills in doing the core ministries will make a difference. And we need to actually keep growing our skills, identify our weaknesses, where we fail and so on. Let me break it down. Leading others spiritually is leading others to get the gospel and grow spiritually under the gospel. The things you bring to bear in this are your preaching ministries, your one-to-one ministries, the gospel rub work where just the gospel comes out of you in every conversation as you seek to actually enter into the life of another person. Now, I do this all the time. In fact, look, for your interest, Geneva Push website, part of another work I'm involved in, has a lot of stuff on these kind of things. If you ever want to chase it up, you'll see videos there and so on. But one of the things we work on all the time with people is analysing where they're at spiritually. We have a kind of a paradigm of thinking about the areas that we need to work on to move them towards, and we proactively work on getting people sorted out in those areas so that we see people move ahead. This is critical because the church will rise or fall on your ability to make a difference in people's lives. Now, we've got to find ways to grow in this area. How are you going? Be honest. And remember, the gospel gives me the security to be honest, so I can look in the mirror and actually see what I am and what's happening and how well I'm going and go, yeah, I'm not doing real well. But God loves me. I'm saved by grace. Here's the questions. Have you seen people get the gospel under your ministry? Have you seen people get the gospel under your ministry? Have you seen people change under your ministry? And I don't just mean say what a nice sermon, but actually repent. Go, oh man, I thought Christianity was like this, but now I see that it's actually, and I'm so sorry that is that happening in your ministries? Are you seeing significant changes? Now that's our chief calling, Colossians chapter 2, Colossians chapter 1 and 2, to present people mature in Christ. Meeting with people. Now, with Geneva Push work, it's a church planting work. It's facilitating the whole church planting movement across the country. And so we meet with young guys who are putting forward the desire to be a planter and assess them. Acts 29 we're doing the same thing in that area as Acts 29. So I get to talk to lots of young guys who are thinking about wanting to be a planter. And the old adage, of course, is important. Past performance is the best indicator of future success. You know that kind of adage. So we always ask them, have you seen people converted in your ministries through your activities? And I don't know how many say, I can't tell you one. Have you seen anyone converted through your ministries? Have you seen anyone changed life by your ministries? Now I get it, it's hard in older churches, and you guys have got a lot of older churches, places where nothing's changed in 400 years. I mean, you're still singing the same songs from the 18th century revival in some places, and in fact you've probably got the same people who are singing the songs from the 18th century revival there. But so it isn't easy, I dare say, in older churches. But there's no getting past this. You, humanly speaking, are the key. You just can't get past that. You, humanly speaking, are the key. And to make change will cost you and them. So you pray, because it is God's work, but notice that you pray, which means it's a responsibility on you to pray. And be aware that God's answer to that prayer will be you. Skilling up, getting better, doing. It's a reminder too that we are to be more like the surgeon than the casualty ward doctor. Have you heard this before? I think it's a very helpful thing. The casualty ward doctor waits for an injured person who realises they're injured to come. And they're in pain and he fixes them up. The surgeon picks up a problem that the person may not even be aware of and puts them through pain to get them to healing. Yeah? So that they break the bone to heal it properly. That's the surgeon, different to casualty ward. Now, that's who we are. We're to be pastors who create pain to bring about healing. For you guys, you've got to do a lot of unsaving people to bring them to be saved. Now that's painful. Now, of course, we're not the surgeon, we're the surgeon with the scalpel, not the chainsaw. Do you know what I mean? The implement we use has got to be a little bit more skillful and subtle than simply smashing. But, now how do you do all of this? Look, there's some good resources. If you've not read Cole Marshall's book, Trellis and the Vine, get hold of that. I heard Leroy Imes' book, Making Disciples, mentioned last night. That's a good book to get hold of. They both have limitations. significant limitations in my view, but they have so much helpful material to provide, they're worth reading. Let me move on to the second dimension. So moving people into spiritual life is our task. Moving people into ministries. Now I think this is a secondary skill. You need the first to grow people spiritually, to actually provide the climate for this second skill to operate. But if you don't get this second skill operating, you won't have a platform to build the first skill beyond just a few people. And until you actually learn to lead others into ministry, you won't start to build the multipliers that really grow the work. Now, this is a different skill. Leading people spiritually is the preaching skill, handling the Bible well, it's insight, pastoral wisdom and so on. Leading people into ministry, you've got to know how to recruit, inspire, train and delegate. And, if I might say, actually I'm not saying it of you, so you can be unoffended entirely. In Australia, we're getting this badly wrong. We are really dropping the ball on this one. We either give a ministry to someone and then keep undermining them, or we give a ministry to someone and dump and run and leave them holding the can, so that we breed badly underperforming congregations who never get the joy that comes from being responsible. We end up ourselves never getting free, and we're forever picking up. And so, you keep getting this place where, who of you wouldn't want a church to be full of actively engaged people doing ministry around you where you didn't have to do everything? Who wants that? But how many of you are frustrated that it's not happening in your church? What is going on? Well, us, we're going on. We're the problem. I was talking to one leader, and we identified that he needed to build a team to spread the load of incorporation in a certain church context, because it was people weren't getting followed up sufficiently, and so we identified then that he needed to recruit half a dozen people to this team. And so we talked, and we left him with the task of recruiting this team, and so then we can talk about what you do next. Well, I came back and talked to him again and said, "How'd you go with recruiting?" He said, "Man, no one wants to do it." I said, "Oh, that's so terrible. How did you do it? How did you recruit?" He said, I worked out 20 people that I thought might be good, and I sent them all an email. Now, you should be laughing. If you recruit by sending an email, an impersonal email to 20 people, how many think you're going to get? Not a one. People need to be helped into ministry, and that's our task. There's two ways typically. You can bring people into a ministry by announcing a need or by giving a vision. If you announce a need, you will get some people who step up, but they'll tend to step up out of guilt. You'll get the odd good one, and the problem with getting the odd good one is it makes you think it was a good way to do it. But you'll get some people step up, they'll come out of guilt and they'll do a little bit of the work. It's exactly the same as money. We're $140,000 behind in our budget. So I don't know, what's that, £110 or something, £110,000. And so, I've announced for 2 weeks that we're behind. We've got some response, and I do it in a certain context and so on. But the last 4 or 5 weeks, the preaching has been through Revelation and 2 Corinthians. And as I've been preaching through those sections, I've just naturally begun talking about eternal perspective, the things of life and death and so on. All of that's been part of the vibe. And 1 week I said, after having 20, 30 minutes talking about the shape of Jesus, I said, if we got this, then Christian ministries would have the money to do anything they... In fact, I said, the 140,000, we've got 6 congregations, but one congregation could nail that if you really got eternity. Now, I just kept going on and preach. But that Monday morning, I got an email from a man saying, "Can I catch you for coffee?" Went and had coffee with him, and he said, "Look, I'm getting it. I don't know where my head's been, but I'm starting to see what life's about, and I'd like to underwrite the budget." That is a significant amount of money, isn't it? And I said, oh, well, let's talk about whether we should do that or not. You know? but my point is simply that you announce a need or you cast a vision. You give the context eternally. You speak of the way this particular work will impact and change lives. You provide an opportunity to help people see how they can make a difference, and you will get people emailing you. Now, with this, therefore, you need to actually think into your ministries, and let me come back to that in a second. You minister the gospel so that people see the glory of ministry. They see the privilege of ministry. Do this in your preaching. Do it in person. Do it in recruiting. Get specific. When you get specific, talk to someone who you're asking to do a ministry. Talk to them about the big picture, how this fits in, why it actually matters. And in fact, here's a test for you. If you're asking people to do ministry that you don't actually know why it matters, don't ask. You know what I mean? Like, we need 3 people on the door to hand out, and I say to you, why don't you cast the big vision? Well, is there a big vision? Do you see the problem? If you can't work out why it actually matters to have someone on the door, then they won't know why it matters. And this is our problem with recruiting. We need to actually get hold of some of these things. There's a whole delegation process that we need to get into. You know, ministers have sometimes not asked people to do ministry personally because they feel that they should just be stepping up and volunteering. Living in a dream. You've got to eyeball people. The American statistic, I don't know whether it's true or not, but gee, it's still worth using. Don't let truth get in the way. But the American statistic says that 10% in churches are doing ministry in a church, 50% don't want to do a ministry in a church, 40% want to, they just don't know how to. Now, I think that's a pretty helpful insight. Whether the percentages are exactly right, I don't know. So it's a challenge as you get larger. In a bigger church, you get to a place where, in a smaller church, recruiting happens by me, the minister, seeing what I need and getting the people, if you're doing it well. But as you get bigger, your ability to know people to gets limited. And so you've got to develop a way to actually break past the people you know to provide a context for people to come forward for ministry as you go towards them to get them to do ministry. Push-pull. And we've created a whole structure and system around that, and I could talk to you about that at some point. Now, our problem too is that secretly we feel bad about asking people to do ministry because it'll mean they'll actually have to do a lot of work, they'll have to come out late, and we feel a little bit guilty about asking them. So we're slow to throw ministries, we feel like we're being slack, everyone's busy, or at least people make you feel like they're all busy. My good friend Cole Marshall told the story many years ago when he said, I needed someone to do this particular ministry, and the man who had the most gifts just kept talking to me about how busy he was. So I didn't ever ask him, and found out 2 months later that he'd volunteered to become the president of the local Parents and Citizens Club at school. And he went, he clearly had time, but he just talked the talk, and I believed it. Don't let people con you. You've got to get past all of that and see how important our work is. We have a leader in our children's ministry who's a wonderful, wonderful, godly woman. And she confessed this struggle. She said she has a very strong responsibility psyche. And so she feels like she's failing if she asks someone to do something. She should be doing it. And she feels a bit kind of icky if I have to ask someone. And when she asks people to do ministries, she feels like she's asking for help, which undermines her ability to keep pushing forward with the asking. It is a privilege to do ministry. I actually have to keep working with them and say, because you've got to actually, you're giving people an opportunity to actually step up and be like Jesus. They're not doing you a favour, you're doing them a favour. You've got to keep thinking like this. And with in mind, it's a very small thing. This is a small thing, but it bugs me no end. Stop saying thank you to people for doing ministry in your church. Why are you doing that? Just think with me for a moment. I'm the captain of a soccer team. I can't bear to call it football. I'm the captain of a football team. And someone scores a goal. Do I run over and go, Well, I run over and hug him and fall on the ground together and all that kind of stuff. But, but do I go, thanks for scoring the goal? Do I thank him for scoring the goal? Does the coach then come at the end of the game and say, thanks guys for playing so well? Now, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you ever think to say thank you if you're the captain of a team and someone does that? You tell me. Give me a thought. It's what they're there for.
He hasn't done it for you.
And he hasn't done it for you. Yeah. This is fundamental to ministry. I don't thank people for the ministries. I express gratitude to God for them stepping up. I'm thrilled to see the life that's being changed in them. But every time I thank them, what I communicate is, well, I'm the nice guy and I want to be nice, and actually subtly you're doing it for me. You just undermine the very principles I'm about, you see. Now, there are times when I should thank someone when they babysit a child for me. Well, they are helping me now, and so I say thank you. But you've got to just discern all of this. Get your language right. Think it through properly. Understand the concepts that we're in. My point is here, one of the major impediments for people stepping up in our ministries is us. We haven't embraced a very important value, which is the value of not just doing ministry, but getting others to have the ministry done. We keep rescuing people, going around people. We ask someone to organise a lunch. We're not sure they've done it, so I ring the place myself. Do you see what I've just done? What I ought to have done is, I'm concerned it's not been done. I ring the person who was tasked to do it to see if they've done it. If I'm concerned that a job I've given someone is too big and I'm worried about where it will get, what you do is you set waypoints. Fortnightly, get them tasks to do on the way through so that you meet with them to see how they're going so you don't end up in 2 months' time with a job undone. You've got to work through these processes. If a person fails, instead of letting it drop, we fix it. As so often we've just got to let people own a job and let it fail so that they grow in responsibility. And then have a big, hard conversation, but we wimp out because we don't want to actually upset people. And in all of that, we effectively communicate through our churches that it doesn't matter really whether you do this or not. And so we find ourselves in 10 years still with no one doing it. And we go, oh, it's all right for you, Andrew. You've got all those people who are helping out. Well, you know why we've got all those people helping out? You go, oh, yeah. You've got to take ownership of where you're at and what you're doing. If you give a person a task, be clear on where it fits in your whole organisation, be clear on the outcomes, be clear on the consequences of this task, why it matters and so on, and follow up. Coach, don't abdicate. Set up follow-up times. With all the high-level staff in our church, I meet with the key high-level staff fortnightly, review tasks, plans of managements. We work through all of that. They then have their teams where they're working through their leaders like this as well. Let me rush on. Now, I don't know whether you've seen yourself in any of this. The key is to skill up, and it might be that you need to learn how to have fierce conversations. What do you do when someone you've asked to do something drops the ball? You need to learn to have a fierce conversation. Beware of the false love that says it would be unloving to hold a person accountable. You know, I couldn't push them on that. Why not? Well, because it would make them feel bad and they're fragile. And you'll have to answer to Jesus for your yes to them and your no to the people that they actually dropped because they didn't do what they did. We had a leader who consistently failed to develop leaders. That was his role. His role was to recruit and train and develop leaders. He was a lovely Christian man. It was a hard conversation to force with him the issues of responsibility, and in the end we had to ask him to step down. People around were very upset because we were so hard. But here's the thing, by continually saying yes to someone who is not performing, we are saying no to the hundreds of people he was stopping us being able to reach. Now, you might choose to do that. Just know you're doing it, that's all. Do you see? Skill up. I might practically suggest take a ministry area, take one at a time, do the full recruitment process. You know, what are we trying to achieve here? Who do we need to do it? Think about how to task them. Talk through each of them exactly what your vision is for the whole big thing, what part it plays in the whole work you're doing, the outcomes, the measures by which you can tell if it's working or not, set up coaching times. 2 more steps, let me rush through. I think the model of church that we've largely run with is the pastor preaching, caring, engaged with everyone, and helping the 10% who want to do ministry tasks. That's what we've been operating with. That tops out at about 100, or if you're really good, 150. But that's the end of you. If we're really going to step up and multiply the work, then you need to now learn the next skill, which is learning to build an organisation. In this, we need to think about structures, systems, and thinking bigger. We need to learn to lead leaders. Now, it's surely obvious the ability for one person to impact an area is severely limited. If I can manage my time really well, I can impact 150 people. But there comes a time where that tops out and all the needs of the people coming to me are so great that I'm swamped under the load. One way forward is rostering. So I run the church meeting and I set up a roster of people, and they, I have a roster who set up the building, do the sound, meet people at the door, and I run that roster. But I've got people now working in ministry with me, I think. But it's a very limited structure because you're still absorbed in the whole work. The next step is to set up someone who runs the rosters for you. And so you lead them so that they set up the rosters, so the rosters are full. Now that's a good next step. You're leading people into ministry, second skill. But the next step is to put in place someone who so gets what you're trying to achieve that they can set up the processes to achieve the outcome that's important here, and they can dream and scheme about how to make the outcome be achieved by better routes. Now you're talking about leading a leader. You see, again, a leader is someone who works towards achieving an outcome. They're not just someone who does a job that you assign them to do. They're given more than a task, they're given an outcome to achieve. Now let me just actually quickly, if you set up someone to look after your small group network, you've not set up a leader. But if you've set up someone to lead this church towards maturity, deep discipleship, which uses small groups as one possible means to that end, you've set up a leader. See the difference? Now, these people are given responsibility for outcomes. They're given freedom to do whatever needs to be done to achieve that outcome. They're given freedom to do things that you might not have even thought of to achieve that outcome with a team of people under them. When you get these kind of leaders, you have real energy because a person isn't just doing a job anymore. They're owning an outcome, one that they themselves get fired up about. Do you see the power of it? This is where you actually get growth on steroids. And if we're to grow like that, we need, and here's the key, we need to lead leaders, to learn how to do that, and to create people who themselves can lead others and so multiply the impact. Now, your Sunday school, I guess you might call them Sunday school superintendent. We call it EV Kids because it's Saturday and Sunday, so it doesn't quite work Sunday. But the person who's running that whole ministry with teams of leaders under them, developing all of that work and so on, that's a different kind of person now. We have staff who are responsible for maturing the whole church. There's 3 full-time staff in that area, but under them, we have people we call CLs, community leaders, who are volunteers who run 10 growth groups. So they actually lead the leaders of 10 growth groups. Do you see? And so what we've done is been able to multiply the pastoral support and discipleship abilities into that very deep-rooted work of our growth group structure, which then fires up the people under them, and so the whole thing energises. We've stepped up people who are volunteers into work that is highly responsible and very significant. Traditionally, we've left that kind of work to staff members. So if you see a need, you employ someone to it. We've worked out we couldn't afford that if we were going to grow. If we're going to reach 30,000 people, we cannot staff that much. And we wanted an Ephesians 4 ministry. Now that takes from you a higher level leadership skill to pull it off, which means you'll have to skill up, do you see, to do it. Because the kind of leader that you give that kind of responsibility and freedom to will create great demands upon your whole organisation. You get it? They'll actually... do you want me to look at you quickly while we do this? Keep going. All right. Yeah. Okay. When you... Sorry, it's awesome what you're doing. And the problem with these kind of leaders is I'll give you a couple of problems. You've got the kind of leader now who can take your ministry off track. You've got the kind of leader who can build silos. So you need to manage high-level leaders to counteract those problems and build them together. That challenge, therefore, is for you to keep the vision unified. Let me give you some tips. Ready for this? It requires a shift in values for you, or better, a further shift along that spectrum I was talking about earlier. That is, we begin our ministries usually because we just want to actually get into people's lives and see them change. You need to actually get a new skill, a new value actually. I'm now not so concerned about me getting into lives and seeing them changed. What I'm concerned about is seeing people change by others getting into their lives to see it happen. See, it's slightly different. And until you embrace that value, you won't get your Ephesians 4 thing going. As you delegate to higher level leadership, you need to step back further and further. This is what I talked about yesterday. It brings great grief. I love being in people's lives. That's why I went into the ministry. But I find now, I remember sitting in the car. I used to have a night to go and visit new people to church. And I remember sitting in the car about 4 years in. And I had one night left in my week. And I probably only had about a half a dozen nights left in the year and to actually go and visit congregation members. And I love doing that. And I sat down, who am I going to go and visit? Oh, I could just go and visit anyone, but I want to make a difference with my visit. So who in the church could I go and visit to make a difference, to make church actually work better and grow better and reach more people? So I got out the directory and started to go through it. I didn't just want to visit someone who was a problem, who had difficulties, because that won't actually make a difference. I wanted to find strategically where I could go. And I went through and I went, no, he's meeting with them, and they're meeting with them, and they're in that group there that are being... I went through the whole directory and I couldn't find one person that my 2 hours would make any difference for the work of the church, and so I got out of the car, shut the door, locked it, and walked home with a real sense of grief that I can know no longer, I don't have an impact at that level anymore. But because I value it being done and not me being the one to do it, I was prepared to shift and change. It's a shift that's been called the shift from shepherd to rancher. Oh, you see it there. I think this is a very helpful little thing. The shepherd is the one who personally cares for the sheep under their responsibility. The herding, the shepherd's there. Involved, responsive, knowing. The rancher is the one concerned to make sure that each sheep has a shepherd. You see, who makes sure that each shepherd is doing the task well, that the sheep are being looked after. But that's a shift. It's a massive shift. But when you make that shift to a rancher, to build shepherds, it brings great power to raise up all kinds of shepherds. Sheep get cared for better. But it's difficult. Leading leaders is powerful, but it means letting go. It means truly rejoicing in giving away authority, power and responsibility. And lots of men find that impossible to do. And lots of you will find it very difficult. Now, it ought actually to be hard. I don't want to pretend. It ought to be hard. I worry about the man who finds it so easy. You need the heart of the pastor. But the need is so great, love requires that we learn to do it. Do you see? Let me rush through. I'll give you a quick little illustration of this, actually. It is difficult because we went into the ministry to be in people's lives. We love that personal engagement. And they love having the minister personally engaged. And I had this, I remember we I got a guy part-time onto staff to run all our welcoming of newcomers, incorporating people to church and pastoral work. A man called Glenn, a wonderful guy. And I remember I had people come to me and say this. They'd go, because I don't visit, they'd come to me and say, Glenn is really caring. He is very good. He really cares for us. And I would go, sometimes out loud, I cared so much that I made us find the money to put him on to care for you. It's because I care that you've got Glenn to care for you. Now, sometimes I said it, sometimes I didn't. I just said, that's fantastic, he's awesome, isn't he? We want to encourage and nurture that kind of work and move on. But that will happen to you. And people will use it to have and so on. All of that, but if you want to grow the work, you've got to actually push there. You need to learn, therefore, how to run meetings. This seems odd, it should be so obvious, but running a meeting with people who are high-level leaders to energise and engage their leaderships together so that you get the synergies is not something that comes easily. You need to learn how to do it. You need to actually learn how to use your voice even. There's some really basic things that we need to do. Learn to manage capable, competent people who have strong views. This brings the whole issue of EQ. Have you heard of EQ? Emotional quotient? There's 4 things to EQ. Your ability to actually respond rightly, engage with people. It's the ability to know yourself. Why is it that I get defensive? Why is it that when he does that and they say that, I react this way? Learning to know yourself so that you can actually find out whether the problem's in me or in them. That's desperately important that you work out that you can manage a bigger and bigger team. Learning to know yourself, learning to manage your reactions so that when you do have negative reactions, you're able to actually channel them, manage them, and marshal positive ones. Understanding others, knowing how they feel, how they work, what's going on for them that brings empathy, sympathy, and ability to actually enter into their problem and not be part of the problem with them. So I have one leader where passive-aggressive kind of, and you know, the problem is he can tap my problems. And so the more I'm aware of my problems that are actually being tapped, the more I can actually get in and help him without it me being part of the problem. You see, all of that's part of learning to be emotionally aware. Putting all of that, therefore, together, fourthly, so that you manage yourself socially to lead a group of people. Learn to get the gospel. Learn to delegate even better. Learn to lead others. Now, can I encourage you? I've got one more big thing to go through. Let me give you a practical exercise. Take the congregation you've got, list every name, and then do a triage. Pull out every name that shows the slightest potential for leadership, either because of spiritual passion or leadership skill. Now be aware, there's a danger with the first kind of person, a danger with the second. Danger with the first is that they might have spiritual passion but be unable to lead others. You've got to be the danger with the second is that they might have leadership skill but they'll always lead as the thing that matters to them, not lead into Christ because Christ doesn't matter as much. There are dangers with each. But out of that group, which of that list of people will get to become a leader amongst you the quickest? It's crass, I know, but 100 people, I pull out a list of 15 that have some passion for the gospel, some leadership ability. Which of those, with my work, could get to be leaders amongst us the quickest? Pull that list out, and then go through your diary and say, I'm going to invest so many hours in each of them because they'll be key for us actually working forward, and go for it. That's how you start to move forward. Work on a clear vision for them. Then grab the next layer down. We call them the long shots. The ones that might or might not in a really long time. But start to work that far back. And there's all kinds of leadership training. There's 2 kinds of leadership training, but I haven't got time to go through it with you. Growing the ministry isn't about just doing one-to-one work. It's about thinking strategically. Let me race through this with you. If we're going to get a ministry that will do bigger and bigger work, you need to develop the ability to actually think strategically. There's a series of skills, I think, that come with this. You need to value the whole work. not just your part in it. One of the problems for us is that we've kind of come through the pathway of, I was running the youth group, or I was running the men's work, and now I'm running the church. Well, you need to develop the value of, it's not the youth work or the men's work that matters here, it's the whole thing. Think strategically about the whole work. You need to be aware that you used to be the doer. You are now no longer the doer. Get the rancher thing. You are the manager of the shepherds. Theologically, it's about shifting your mindset from family model of church to the body metaphor of church. It is there, but thinking body, not just family. Second one there, learn to analyse the work. This higher level leadership, you need to actually begin to be someone who can think into how this whole system works. Why does it work? What makes it tick? If we do this in this place, what impact will it have across the whole work? How will it help us get forward or not? Being someone who analyses, we go away regularly as a staff and do this together now. It used to just be me, but I now take away the whole staff and take away the senior staff, and we spend 3 days analysing the work, going through the whole thing, picking it apart, seeing what's happening, what's not happening, what's working, what's not working. How does the small group structure, how does our growth group structure help our work? What if it's not healthy? What impact will it have? Analysing, understanding the whole. This means, get this, this means that you don't change a group, the church, by changing a few individuals. I think this is a myth. And I actually emphasise the fact that I think it's a myth. I could be wrong, but my sense is that we can buy into a model of ministry which says, if I just meet with 10 men and change their lives, then that will sweep through the church and change everyone's lives. No. Church is a system. It's a structure. I call it, it's groupology. There's a study of group, a sociological understanding of group together that means if you just change individuals, you won't actually change the whole group. You need to actually work at the level of individual and thinking about group. How an event, how a structure, how an activity together, how that actually breeds and facilitates the individual's growth and impact through the whole system. I used to do university ministries, so I'd work with individuals, and I would see 10 hours of work in an individual make a massive difference. I then did that same work in a different context, in a parish context with a different leader. Same 10 hours of work, not much impact. Doing the same thing. Now, what was different? What was different was the group. The umbrella under which the university worked was this pulpit ministry that was driving forward, and so you did work in the culture of that context. It made a bigger difference than if you did it in a context where the pulpit ministry wasn't. Now, my key, therefore, is if you're going to actually change individuals, you need to get greater traction from those changes by the way you actually run the whole thing. Do you see the point I'm trying to make? Understanding and getting into that's important. You need to think long term. When you do ministry, you need to think about the next 20 years, not the next 6 months. My desire is to see every single person mentored personally. You need to think priorities. We want to reach 30,000 people. How are you going to do that? Well, let me give you a quick illustration of a problem we had and see if that helps, and I might then try and just stop and throw to questions. I've got much more, but I've always got much more than we can go through here. We had, our determination is to reach 30,000 people on the Central Coast. Our morning service, our 9:30 service, was starting to plateau, and I was coming up to a period of time where I wanted to plant a church soon, 20 minutes north of us. Now, one simple answer was to hive off 50 people, go and plant a church. But if I did that, all that would have done was bought the home church 18 months of pain while we recovered, and then maybe another 2 or 3 years of growth before we filled up again. So we only would have got 2 years out of it. And I'm trying to reach 30,000 people, not just 50 more people, right? So what I determined to do was I want to go faster here. So I determined that I would split the morning church into 2 first, and then a year later plant out of both of them. So there'd be less out of both, and we would have actually sold the vision to the church that we won't just hit a ceiling and let others do the work. We're going to take sacrifice ourselves and actually halve what's in each church to then grow much bigger, and out of that to send off so we didn't feel the pain. Do you see there's strategic thinking coming here, working through priorities and so on to get momentum rolling? Now, the impact of that was that we grew much faster and got a church plant happening and sustained the goose that laid that egg. You see. Thinking through all of this is part and parcel of what we do. You've only got 60 hours a week. How are you going to apportion your time to build a work? You need to be proactive. You need to think strategically. You need to build an engine and so on. Let me stop there. We've got 15 minutes. I've got a whole lot more. We'll leave it. You want to ask any questions? It's not worth it anyway. No. Do you want to ask anything? Yeah.
As you delegate and release gifts and step back, skilling up other people, you hinted at, or you pointed at the fact that you are, in quotes, losing touch with the man in the pew. And that sometimes bothers you. Do you sort of get a situation where you feel lonely or isolated? How do you compensate for that sense of, I'm Moses on the mountain and they're all fighting with Joshua in the valley? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Everyone's different, but you get lonely. My wife gets lonely. Small price to pay. Just move on. Yeah. Go out to the movies together. Come home, cry. Go to bed and do it again tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? Now everyone's different. Some of you will manage it differently. I go for a surf. I have my, there's lots of things I do to but it isn't. We can't keep up friendships. We have people in church that we really like and are friends with, but they don't invite us to parties because we're busy, and we feel that, and we can't invite anyone to our place much because we're busy. But we'll be in heaven together. Do you know? I've only got 20, 30 more years to go, and really, I mean, I don't mean that facetiously. We haven't shed blood. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
Biblically, we have a model of pastor-teacher, but we also have the ministry of leadership. Now, are you describing something that one person should have both? My concern is I'm a pastor-teacher. I feel completely inadequate with this whole leadership thing. I want someone else to come and lead me.
Yeah.
Are we looking for one person or one category of people when there should be two?
Yeah. Yeah, the language of pastor-teacher, so Ephesians 4, you get the language used in a variety of ways, don't you? So the language of elder, presbyteros, you get episkopos, the overseer. You get the language of leader in Hebrews 13. That's a different word again. And you get the language of shepherd, of course, which is poio, isn't it? It's the person who's doing it's not necessarily a role, it's something you do. So you've got all this different language. The point I would want to make is actually I think we've invested too much in particular historical structures, thinking we've got the Bible right. So the language of elder has taken on all kinds of understandings for us about what an elder is. We've read that back into the scriptures and thinks that's what the Bible's teaching. But you'll notice, of course, that when the Bible uses the language of leadership into the Greek churches, it uses the word episkopos, not presbyteros, which immediately says to you, there's nothing sacrosanct about the word presbyteros. It's just a word that talks about, the mature. There's certain functions that person has that's reflected in both words, but we're not to get hung up on the word and imagine pastor teacher is a fixed certain role that has these very tight boundaries to it. The Bible is very open with its sense. It's to be people who lead the people of God on the purposes of God that He has for them into disciple making and mature. So don't, I think the problem with the Reformed pastor, for instance, is the book, is that it conveys the idea there's a biblical way to be this pastor, and it's his way. But it's largely driven, in my estimation at least, by village life in England or Wales or somewhere here, wherever it was. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think I think it's read too much into language that has bound us too narrowly. Has that little rave helped at all?
Is there a problem with splitting the leadership from the pastor-teacher because you want self-consciously to be leading through the ministry of the word, so that you want folks to sense that the direction and the shape of the congregation is actually coming directly out of God's word?
Sorry, we needed a microphone there. Is there a problem with, I can actually repeat, is there a problem with splitting the pastoral leadership, pastor from leadership because of the word? Look, I think there is. So thank you for the question. I think, my sense is, do you remember the prophet, priest and king thing that we heard a few years ago? You know, some are prophets, some are priests. I think that's an unhelpful language, and I don't think you can distinguish like that. That's Jesus. He's those things. I don't think you can run that into Christian ministry. And I don't think we should be finding the king, you know, the leader, and supplementing him with the prophet or the priest. My view is, and this is a personal thing, I think we need to be finding the people who have all the values of yesterday, with a deeply immersed sense of the Word of God as the thing that leads the church, is the thing that nurtures the church, and skill that person up to be able to lead by either getting higher and higher abilities or bringing team members together with him as he continues to lead with the Word of God. So I can't get my mind around the concept that someone might be the preacher of the church and someone else who's not at all theologically minded, captured by the scriptures, is the leader, the king. I just think that's wrong. It's very unhealthy, and long term will destroy us. I'd rather have churches led by people who aren't very good leaders, but are passionate about the kingdom, immersed in the Word of God, prayerful, and I'd try and work with them to skill them up. Much rather that context.
You said that there's all kinds of leadership training, but no time to go through it. That's exactly the thing I think a lot of us need. So I really want to know, what do you do with your guys when you spend your hours with them?
Yeah. Look, a whole lot of stuff. A lot of things to say. The church is growing, and I had a very flat management structure, to use that kind of language, where everyone reported to me as it got bigger and bigger, and I was doing that because I had some false value that as the pastor I should be in everyone's life and know everybody, and it was cramping and killing our ability to grow. They weren't being cared for well, and so what I had to do is build hierarchy into it, in the best sense, build structure into it. So I actually bit the bullet and said to our children's worker, I'm not going to meet with you anymore to manage and help and lead you and pastor you. I'm going to get Rhett, who will meet with me, meet with you. And it really hurt. But I had to do it because that actually meant she was being cared for better. And it meant I could care for, and so on and so forth. So we've built more structure and hierarchy. I meet with about half a dozen senior leaders now, and that's I can do that because I now have a PA. Now, I've resisted spending money on a PA up until 18 months ago. And please do not look at churches like ours and go, gee, the key is to have that person, that person, person. We didn't employ administrative staff for 4 years and then only put them on part-time because I wanted to invest money in frontline change life workers, do you see? I didn't employ a youth worker for 5 years, 6 years, because listen to this, I'm sorry if this sounds dreadful, but if I spent, in your terms, £40,000 on a youth worker, he would impact 50 kids who would give me no money. Isn't that right? I mean, yeah, they would in 20 years' time. Now, I knew that if I wanted to get the best youth work happening, I needed to build a big enough base financially to resource that work. which meant hold off doing that work. You see, so this kind of thing. Now, what do I do with my leaders? So I now have built a structure. You've got to realise lots of decisions have happened to lead to the ability to get where we are, where I now do have a PA, which means I can sustain a lot more reports because she manages all. I just sit in an office and the next one comes in, the next one comes in, the next one. I don't have to. Do you find it really hard to get appointments? I find the time involved in actually making an appointment to see someone is almost as much time as I spend seeing them. Isn't that right? But now, so I'm just saying I'm in a place where that's quite different. So I can go through a lot of people and, yeah, look, you know, I work through, we have strategic management plans that we work up. I take them through each of the, I've got them all on my computer. If you ever wanted to see them, I could show you some of the stuff. We work through that to try and coordinate the whole work to hand it a certain direction, and my task is to keep making sure we're all on track doing that. With some guys, I work through plans of management to make sure that they're learning to lead better and recruit and delegate better. Other guys are on top of that, and so we work out different things with different guys. But, yeah.
In order to prevent you being too remote as a sort of almost like an ultimate leader, how important is it for you to preach in your church, and how regularly do you preach?
Yeah. I feel like there's questions behind that question. Let me try and get my head into it. No, not negatively, but I think you're raising a whole bunch of issues that have... it's important for me to preach because in 10 hours, I can pull out a sermon that people are happy to come in here and bring their friends to hear, okay? But other guys take 20 hours to get that, and even then it's not quite. So, you know, it's just a theology of giftedness in our team. It's a bit of that. So is it important for me because I'm the senior minister to be the main preacher? I'd have to think into that. It's not as simple as that, I don't think. Now we have a number of high-level pastoral leaders who don't ever preach, but you mustn't invest this with all leadership authority. Do you know what I mean? This is just one structure of our gathering life together. It's a very central one, no doubt, but we have all kinds of other contexts where the word is leading the people and people are being fed and taught. And so our guys teach in all kinds of contexts, one-to-one, house-to-house, all that kind of deal. This is a chief one, it's a main one, but it's not the only one, and don't make it the key one, and don't make it the only thing. So that's partly an issue you need to embrace. So we have 6 congregations. I do make sure I preach at all of them. So I preach 5 times, 4 times on a weekend across all kinds of services and so on. And I'm doing that for an efficiency reason. In 10 hours, I can preach in 4 or 5 sermons instead of 5 men preparing the same sermon taking 15 hours, which means you lose 50 hours, 60 hours of work for just one sermon that I could have done in 10 hours. There's efficiency issues, there's managing issues. Is that touching on some of the stuff? Yeah. I feel like there's more. I feel like there's a whole other area there, though. We lead the church by the word, but don't think the only way you lead by the word is in the pulpit. Did you say that? I think that's an important principle.
I think what I also was thinking about was whether the danger is being the leader on the top with so many, you get remote, but you're obviously not getting remote because you're preaching to people regularly in these congregations.
Okay, so yes, so is there a danger of getting remote? Yes, there is a danger. And this is, you don't want to be the CEO who sits in his office and parades out and just delivers and walks away. So I make sure at now I'm an introvert, so like I think most of us have come through that kind of study world and so on. So I don't like crowds. So I find it really difficult. But I make myself, every service I preach at, I make myself hang around for as long as I can. And with 4, I don't know how often you preach on a weekend, but I tell you, after the 4th sermon, all I want to do is go home. Do you know, I don't even want to sing. My voice is going. But I make myself, what I do is I sit in the congregation. I never sit up the front. I never do this kind of lordly chair thing. I'll sit somewhere in the congregation, and then I'll, at the end of the preaching, go and sit next to someone, and I'll always turn to them and say, tell me about how things are going spiritually. Get into their life, and then have a conversation, maybe pray, get up, mix around with people. I do that wherever I can all the time. And that's quite a discipline and an exercise, but I think it's for those reasons we must. I work at being strategic, but I work at being strategically unstrategic. Do you know what I mean? So that I've got time to disciple people still, and I do disciple some guys, but I've made it a pattern of life of being strategically unstrategic in some of the guys I do disciple, just to keep me grounded, to keep me with a heart of compassion. I just see someone in need, but I don't let that dominate my ministries. So I give a little bit to it, but I don't ever say no all the time. So some of that's...
How are you going to train up your successor? Especially if you're doing the big preach only, how are you going to get a guy who's going to be able to do what you're doing when you can no longer do it?
Yeah. A couple of things. And again, I don't know if there's questions there, but one of the questions that often comes is, this is just personality driven. You know, when you go, the whole thing will collapse. So therefore, we shouldn't try and grow churches big. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying you're saying that, but you just triggered for me a thought that I'm now going to rave on about for a second. It's a little bit like, I've found lots of eldership structures are so afraid of their leader getting too much power that they might take them off astray. You know, they're worried about this horse that is so powerful and strong that he'll gallop into the wrong place, that they nobble him and cut his hamstring so he can't run anywhere. Now we'll be safe. But you have a church that never goes anywhere, but we're safe. Do you see? And so, who knows what the Lord might do in 20 years' time? I might die soon. Who knows? And if the whole thing crumbles, really? So what? We had 17 years of changing lives and seeing people converted, and God will raise up someone else somewhere else. And do you know what I mean? So on that issue, I think we need to be cautious about thinking we ought not to pursue this thing because what happens after the next person and so on. Now, how do we therefore train other people? In our context, this is the irony that people don't appreciate. In a bigger church, you actually get big. Our youth group is 350 kids. That pulpit is a very significant ministry, you see. So our growth group leaders meet every quarter. So 4 times a year we have all our church's leaders get together who are running growth groups. That's a group of 160 people. Now, I don't speak at that. I don't speak at youth group. So lots of other team members are teaching, preaching in all of these contexts. So as you get bigger, the pulpit becomes only one spot amongst many. It is the biggest spot, but there's other really very big. So we're training lots of preachers. You don't have to be on the Sunday pulpit to get trained as a preacher in our church.
I'm just so you know where I'm coming from. I'm in a church plant. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you as a church think through how you get the gospel out to the people that are around you in your community and that type of thing. What type of things are you thinking about as you're thinking about, I think this would probably come under learn to do the core ministries. Can you talk about that a little bit? What you have
wanting to, that will be tomorrow.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, the whole thing tomorrow will be on mission and thinking about mobilising for mission. Yeah, so. Do you want to ask me? Now, I'm happy to do this all day, but I know you've got to go places. So someone's going to stop me when they need to stop me.
Some of these things I hear, I think I can easily understand how they operate in a church as big as yours. But like, sort of, when do you start to initiate the changes in your leadership structure? So let's say you're a church of 50 people. You know, saying no to a funeral at that point, or to going to visit someone in hospital. You know what I mean? It's inconceivable. So could you just give us, like, what are the different boundary markers? When do you start to kind of almost anticipate growth and change structures that factor into that?
Yeah, very good. You've got to keep thinking, well, sorry, let me rephrase it. I think we need to keep thinking outputs. And so I'm constantly thinking, I'm trying to grow the church, move the church forward, and in that light, I'm constantly analysing what's hindering me. Where are the blockages? And if I'm finding the pastoral demands of funerals, weddings, whatever, in a church of 100, are stopping me get to the strategic thinking, the working on the business, not in the business, if they're starting to get to the point where I can't get to that kind of thing, then I know I'm hitting a point where I need to manage that differently. So partly it's driven by necessity. There's a blockage I need to get past. Partly it's driven by anticipating potential blockages. And so there's lots of good stuff around on growth barriers. So, if, friends tell me if you type in your Google thing, breaking the 200 barrier, you'll get a whole host of stuff on tips and so on, breaking the growth barrier of 200. And there's a barrier that it's about 150 to 250. You get this barrier. It's typically a staffing barrier and a congregational structure barrier. But then you hit the 400 barrier, the 800 barrier, the 1,000 barrier, and so on and so forth. And it's sociological. It's just a reality of our humanity. We keep thinking in spiritual terms it shouldn't be so. It shouldn't be as crass as that. I should just be able to preach the word, and the place just kept... Martin Lloyd-Jones did it, and he just kept growing this incredible work, and Spurgeon did it, and that's all we need is just to know I should just be... Friends, yes, God will raise up the extraordinary to keep us humble. I get that, but in the ordinary... we do need to take responsibility and think through these things, praying that we keep raising up these others as well. So we do a lot of, if I had time, I'm sorry, but we analyse the work along a pipeline. We think about where the blockages are. One thing hit me some years ago. I was finding myself unable to get to things I knew that if I could fix church. So I realised there were problems that were hindering us, but I didn't have time to get to them. So I had to find time to work out how to get to them, and then find time to work out how to make that how-to into effect. You see, so I was proactively pursuing it. But so blockage, strategic, yeah. Time? Okay, we'll finish. I'll pray. You did very well. Father, we do ask that you might raise up the Spurgeons and the Martin Lloyd-Joneses, that you might raise up people amongst us who, that you might anoint with such power that they would proclaim your word to the masses. We pray for another Whitfield. Please bring these amongst us. Father, in the meantime, please help us as we wait to be the kind of leaders we need to be skilled up such that we're able to operate to bring your word to bear on more and more people. That you might help us facilitate things such that your powerful life-giving word does go out, is heard, and please by your Spirit cause it to bear much fruit. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.